Okay, we are officially on, and the first thing I want to do is welcome everyone tonight. We've got a pretty good crowd here. We got almost 40 people in right now. There should be a few more people coming in as well. And what we're going to do tonight, you're going to be treated to a presentation, a Wildlife for You presentation. These are wildlife webinars that are given by professional biologists, and they're geared towards teaching the everyday average person more about wildlife. Almost everyone loves wildlife. Sometimes we don't know as much as we should know about wildlife, and that's what these presentations are geared for. We do specialize, particularly me, there's other instructors, but I specialize in bears. Spent my career working with bears, and so tonight's presentation is called The Language of Bears. And it's meant to teach you how to better understand, how to better react to any type of bear encounter you have. Believe it or not, bears speak to us in many different ways, whether or not it's vocalizations or body language. They're trying to tell us something. And so hopefully this class is going to teach you a little bit of what those bears are trying to say to us. Now, for those that don't know me, I am your presenter. My name is Daryl Radijak. I'm a wildlife biologist. I'm a large carnivore specialist. And so what I plan to do today is talk to you probably for about 45 minutes at least, maybe a little bit longer. Have a slide presentation, but I'm going to be stopping periodically to make sure we get all of your questions answered. But for the most part, I want everyone to sit back, relax, just take in the slides, listen to what we're talking about. And then if you have questions or comments, we're going to welcome those too, and we'll make sure everyone's cared for. So with that, I'm going to get started here on tonight's presentation, The Language of Bears. And so before I start everything, I usually like giving a bit more background information of all the instructors that teach these classes, just so you have some confidence in what you're hearing. Again, my name's Daryl Radijak. I did receive my Bachelor of Science degree from the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. If you've never heard of it, that's okay. It's part of Syracuse University campus. Fantastic school for wildlife and forestry. But that was way back in the early 90s, so that dates me a little bit. But after I received my degree in wildlife, I started working for this really awesome place in East Tennessee, just outside of Great Smoky Mountain National Park. It's called the Appalachian Bear Center. And what I would do there is, I worked there for about 5 years. The National Park Service, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, or the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency would bring me orphan bear cubs. And it was my job to raise these bears to be released back into the wild. So pretty much all the feeding, all the observation, everything was done behind blinds. The picture you see there of me holding the cub was a cub we were just about ready to foster to a wild mother bear in the Smokies. But that's where my passion and love for working with bears grew. And so I did that for about 5 years. And then I was promoted up. I started working for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and because of my experience with bears in the Smokies, I was soon promoted to the big game coordinator for the state. So I was over black bears, white-tailed deer, elk, wild hogs. Instead of managing individual animals, I was now managing populations of animals, so I was the bear coordinator for the state. And then did that for about 7 years. They promoted me again, became the chief of wildlife for the state of Tennessee. So I was still over bears and all the other critters. Did that for another 5 years and absolutely loved that job. But I always, as a young boy, wanted to live and work out west. So about 3 years ago, I made the jump, moved to the Southern Rockies, and I'm living in heaven right now. For those that don't follow me, you should see all the places I get to go on a daily basis. So just so you know, I do have over 20 years working with bears, whether or not it's individual bears or bear populations. So what you're going to be learning tonight, just understand it's based in science. This isn't my opinion. This is the leading science out there. So sit back, relax, and again, just try to let it all sink in. Okay, we're going to start here with a very, very, very important question. Why is it important for us to know what animals are saying? Why do we have to know about the language of bears? And so here's the reason why. Pretty much everyone here in this classroom today, I can almost guarantee you're all wildlife lovers. You love being in the outdoors, going for hikes, going wherever you want to go. The cool thing is most of us, there's many of us that that live in these pretty awesome places that have lots of green space, lots of wildlife living in them. And whenever we go for a hike, whether or not it's a backcountry, 3-day backcountry trek, or even just a walk with your dog in a county park, there's a really good chance we're going to run into wildlife. And so if you're walking along and you have a crow or a raven squawking at you, oftentimes you don't pay attention, and that's fine. Sometimes, in fact, I can almost guarantee if you're walking anywhere in the forest, you're bound to have some squirrels chattering at you. They're going to be trying to tell you stuff. And for the most part, we just disregard it. Oftentimes, those animals get larger and larger. You might have some type of ground squirrel like this. You might even have a coyote that is really reacting to your presence, and he's trying to make his presence known to you. And oftentimes, again, we disregard it. But what do you think if we're walking through there and all of a sudden we encounter this guy? Don't you think it'd be wise if we knew what this animal was trying to say to us? He's much larger. Everyone knows the reputation of bears. And oftentimes bears are trying to speak to us. And oftentimes we have no idea what they're trying to say. And it's really easy to understand. So that's what I'm here today to do, is teach you how to better understand when bears are trying to speak to you. But here's another really important thing of why I teach this class. And again, this is my most popular class, been doing this for a number of years. But this is why it's really, really important that we start expanding our bear education and talking about this stuff. Let's look. I apologize, I am a scientist, so I do pull out numbers and graphs every once in a while. But let's look at population over the last, say, 50 years. So this graph shows time going across to the right and population going up. So let's start talking about the human population. So if we were to guess, over the last 50 years, what has the human population done? This is actually pretty simple. I imagine everyone out there in computer land right now understands that human populations are going up. But this is where it gets really interesting, because when I ask that same question and I say, what are bear populations doing over the last 50 years? I can almost guarantee, in fact, I know whenever I go out and give this talk in public where I'm face-to-face with people, the vast majority of folks in the crowd say bear populations over the last 50 years are declining. And that is not the case. Not the case at all. Believe it or not, bear populations in North America over the last 50 years are increasing very, very sharply. Now, you have to understand when Eastern Europeans first landed in North America and started colonizing North America, they laid waste to a lot of wildlife. They extirpated or they killed out a lot of local populations, so bears, for the most part, were wiped out in most parts of the country. Their last strongholds were primarily out west and in a couple small spots along the Appalachian Mountains. But over the last 100 years, we've been doing a much better job managing our wildlife. So we've been able to put in laws and regulations to protect those animals, and bear populations have been climbing tremendously fast, especially on the East Coast. So what do we have here? We have human populations going up. We have bear populations going up. Literally what that's resulting in, we have two worlds here. We have the human world and we have the bear world. And those two worlds are colliding. So this isn't a question of should we learn to live together. This is more or less we have to learn to live together because our populations are increasing, their populations are increasing, and we got to learn to coexist. So this is a big reason why I do this class. I'm going to let you in on another little secret. I told you I'm a wildlife biologist, and I am. And I'm not doing this presentation for us. I always tell people I like people, but I love animals, and so I'm doing this presentation mostly for them. Because whenever humans and bears come together, it's pretty much the bears that lose out. So the more I can teach people how to better coexist, the better off it is for both people and the bears together. All right, that's my soapbox, and then we're going to get into the class. So here's a scoop, guys. Learning about bears is really easy. It's really enjoyable. Most people love bears. Some people are deathly afraid of them. Some people absolutely love them, want to cuddle them. None of those are right. You got to have a little balance. You have to have respect for them. You also have to have some appreciation for them. Best way to do that is to learn about them, to become knowledgeable, to know all there is to know about these animals. It's going to make you appreciate them more. It's going to make you respect them a whole lot more. So what I do with all these classes, in particular this one, is I give a little introduction into the biology and behavior of the animal itself, because the better you can understand that animal, the easier it is to understand what the animal is trying to say to you. So let's jump in and start talking about just basic biology. And we're going to start really basic. Some of you may already know this. Some of you may be surprised at some of this stuff. But for the most part tonight, we're going to be talking about black bears. I could do a whole separate class on grizzlies, but tonight we're talking about black bears because they are the most prolific and most dominant bear on the North American landscape, and most people are likely to run in black bears. And so when we're talking color phases, right away everybody knows that black bears can be black. In fact, on the East Coast, that's pretty much all they are. Once in a while you have a bear that might be a little bit lighter color, but for the most part, black bears are black. A few of them will have a white chest blaze, but everyone understands that black bears could be black. This is where it gets really cool, though. Did you know that black bears can also be brown? Now, if you're new to the West, have never been out West, and you go for a walk and you see this bear walking in the woods with you, many people will call this a grizzly. It's not a grizzly or a brown bear. This is just a brown-colored black bear. These bears can also be blondish, once again, very grizzly-like. This, too, is a black bear. It just comes in a blonde coloration. One of my favorites, and you see it primarily in the Southwest, are these cinnamon-colored bears, these redheads, so to speak. Absolutely gorgeous bears. They're all black bears. They're all the same species, Ursus americanus. Here's one of my favorites. I shouldn't have clicked this up there, but did you know that in Kermode Island, it's off the coast of British Columbia, there is a black bear that has a white coat. These are not albino black bears. These are simply black bears that have white coats. They're called Kermode bears or spirit bears. A small population of them, but once again, they're still black bears. And then last but not least, there is a black bear that actually comes in a bluish phase, a grayish-bluish phase. These are found in southeast Alaska. They're also called glacial bears. Now, it's not a real bright blue, but when the sun hits it just right, you can see a little blue shimmering, or the grayish-blue shimmering. So some of you may not have realized, but black bears come in all sorts of colors. So if you're vacationing anywhere in North America, just understand what a black bear may look like. It may not be black all the time. So, moving on, let's just describe black bears, because most people think they know a lot about black bears and what they look like, but what you come to find out is they're beyond reasonable in many situations. And so, what I want people to understand, bears are not this humongous giant type of animal. Typically, a mature black bear, a male mature black bear, will range anywhere from, say, 250 pounds to 400 pounds. That's a really, really big adult black bear. Females are usually much smaller. You're looking 150, 200 pounds for an adult female black bear. That's not very big. I imagine there's some men in this class today that are bigger than the average size adult female bear. Now, I will tell you, most people have this unreasonable expectation, thinking bears are larger than life. And I'm going to tell you a little story. When I was working back in Tennessee at the Appalachian Bear Center, a woman had called me because she was concerned about this black bear that was visiting her bird feeder. And she was concerned about it. I told her to pull down the bird feeder and let the bear move on its way, but her concern was more for the bear itself, because she said it was really small and it was really, really skinny. She said she could almost see the rib cage on that bear. And she compared it to the size of her German Shepherd. And so I was sitting there thinking, if we had to send someone out, I asked her, I said, how much do you think the bear weighs? And she politely responded, she said, sir, the bear can't be any more than 300 pounds. I don't know how many 300-pound German Shepherds are out there, but there's probably not a lot. But this goes to show that these bears, though small as they are seen as larger than life in the eyes of many, many people. And so typically black bears are much, much smaller than most people give them. Usually when we were working and I'd get a call about a bear in the area and someone would tell me how big that bear is, if I would divide by 2, I was usually right on with the estimate of how big that bear is. So anyway, bears are not, black bears are not as big as most people think. Brown bears could be much, much bigger, but that's a whole different presentation. So let's talk about the home range of a black bear. Anywhere 60 to 150 square miles is highly, highly dependent on food sources. And so bears move when they need to move to find food. So if food is scarce, their home range is going to be a whole lot bigger. If there's a lot of food around, they're not going to travel too much, but they could have really, really big home ranges. Here's the reason why, and I just mentioned it. They are eating machines. They're not classified as carnivores, although they do eat meat. They do eat everything. They eat meat, they eat vegetables, they eat anything they will find. And so they're technically classified as omnivores. It means they'll pretty much eat whatever they stumble onto. Another term we sometimes use is they're opportunistic. So whatever they find is fair game. And so knowing that they eat all sorts of food, you have to understand that they're mostly vegetarian. Usually upwards about 90% of their diet's going to consist of berries, grasses, nuts, all the vegetable items. But if they do stumble upon a fawn or carrion or a dead carcass, they'll eat that too. So that's where they do get the meat side of things. But for the most part, they're big omnivores. Now, because of that, one of the reasons that they're these eating machines is due to what I just put up there about bears hibernate. They're a large mammal that hibernate. And many people know me, I will get in discussions all the time because people will say bears don't hibernate in the South, and they do. They do it a little bit differently, but they hibernate. But because the bears hibernate, you have to understand for 2-3 months, sometimes as long as 5 months, they're not eating anything. And so when they wake up out of hibernation, they're starving. They could have lost 30% of their body weight. And so they're looking for calories. And so in the springtime, they're usually in a bad mood because they're hungry. And so summertime rolls around, you have the berry crops coming in, they kind of lighten up a little bit. They enjoy the pleasures of summer. It's also their mating season. But then all of a sudden, this thing called hyperphagia kicks in. And it's a feeding frenzy because guess what? They got to fatten up for hibernation. And so springtime, they're feeding because they're coming out of hibernation. Summertime, they get a little respite. But then fall, they're feeding again, getting prepared for hibernation. So this makes them eating machines. And so they're literally driven to eat. And this is so critically important to understand because this will explain their behaviors when you encounter them. So the one thing that I need to mention, and this will be the last thing about the bear biology, is we have to talk about their senses because their senses are just absolutely unreal. So first, we'll start with sight. It's the least of their senses as far as how good it is. It's very similar to ours. Some people have pretty good eyesight. Most have average eyesight. Bears can see about as well as humans can. And so you have to understand when you're hiking, if you encounter a bear that's in a field, sometimes that bear stands up. That bear is not trying to send a message to you. He's not saying he's feeling this way or that way. That bear is oftentimes standing up just so he can get a better visual of you. And so their sight is about as good as humans. But this is where it gets good. Because if you look at their hearing is far and above way better than humans. They can hear things that we cannot hear. Now, I don't have a really good comparison, but you know as well as I that most animals, whether or not it's cats, dogs, bears, anything, they could hear a whole lot better than humans. Humans don't have the greatest hearing. But this is what sets bears apart. Their sense of smell. It's literally unequaled in the mammal world. And I wrote an article once called The Nose, the Glorious Nose, because it is so fascinating learning how good their sense of smell is. And this is, once again, going to dictate their behavior. And so let me try to explain how good a bear can smell. And so let's start with the human nose. We're all sitting here in your living room or bedroom, wherever you're watching, and you can smell things. If something was cooking in the kitchen, you'd be able to smell that. You know what you could smell with a human nose. Now, most of us, or many of us, are dog people, or we know people with dogs, and we know that dogs have a tremendously good sense of smell. And if you compare the human nose to a dog nose, you can actually do some mathematical calculations, and they've done this, and let me explain it. Inside the lining of the nose are what's called olfactory receptors. They're smell receptors. And if you look at the human nose compared to the dog usually has about 100 times more of those sensory receptors than a human. So they can smell about 100 times better than a human. Now, everyone knows that the dog with the best sense of smell is the bloodhound. If you look at the lining of the bloodhound's nose, it has about 300 times more sensory receptors than a human. So their sense of smell is 300 times better than us. Now this is where it gets really good, because let's talk about a bear. If you look at the bear's inside of a bear's nose, it has 7 times more sensory receptors than a bloodhound. So if you do that math, that 300 times 7, you're looking at over 2,000 times. A bear's nose is 2,000 times better than a human nose. And right away you're like, wow, that sounds really impressive, but I have no idea what that means. And I was the same way. What does 2,000 times better mean? You could barely even equate that in your mind. So I came up with this little scenario to help you understand how good a bear's sense of smell is. So let's run through this exercise and talk about a can of beans, and let's smell the beans. So we as humans, we go to the store, we buy a can of beans, we bring it home, we open up that can of beans, we put it on a pot, or in a pot on the stove, and those beans start cooking. We as humans can smell the beans. So if you take that can of beans, before you even open it up and you present it to that dog, to that bloodhound, he can smell remnants of those beans, like either through the can or on the label. He can smell beans emanating from that can. We would never ever be able to detect that. So that dog can smell beans coming from that can. And this is what a bear can do. The bear can smell the perfume that was on the lady that put the beans in the can 2 weeks earlier. And so right away you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe how strong a bear's sense of smell is. And it's crazy, crazy strong. So hopefully this analogy lets you understand how powerful their nose is. However, if you're anything like me, right away I was thinking, gosh, that's sensory overload. That bear's mind cannot process. If it's so strong to smell so much detail, its mind has to get blown because all those smells that are out there. And so here's the best way that I could come up with to describe what's going on with a bear. And hopefully this will make sense. I can't see a show of hands, so it's not going to help if I say raise your hand. But hopefully most of you or all of you have been to a place like this, Chuck E. Cheese. If you haven't been to a Chuck E. Cheese, think of a bowling alley or an arcade where you walk in the door and immediately your mind is just bombarded with all these noises. You hear bells and sirens and whistles and kids screaming and people yelling and vacuum cleaners going. It is just sensory overload in the auditory fashion. So you hear things just nonstop inside this Chuck E. Cheese. Now, imagine going in there with either your child or with a friend of yours. You can sit down at a booth in the arcade or in the Chuck E. Cheese, and you can have a conversation back and forth with that person. Even though all those other sounds are going on, you can still talk to that person because you can focus in on exactly what you want to hear. Another way to think of it is if you're sitting there and all of a sudden over the intercom it says, table 4, your pizza's ready, and you're table 4, you can suddenly, you can cue in on that one sound. That is what's going on, I believe, in a bear's mind. And so here's what happens. Black bear wakes up. It's hungry. Whether or not it's spring, summer, fall, they're looking for calories. They're looking for lots and lots of good food to eat, something that's going to put on weight quickly. So I can almost guarantee that that bear wakes up, it's going to be able to smell the honey that's in the hive high up in the oak tree. Without a doubt, he smells that. Undoubtedly, he smells those blackberries that are blooming in the field just down the road. In fact, his nose is so good, he could smell some of those grubs that are underneath the log that are down by the stream, that are just squirming around. And then the bear smells something else. He smells something off in the distance. He smells something that's really high in calories, really high food reward, that's going to really put on weight quickly. Which one of these items here do you think that bear is going to be lured to, or that he's going to seek out? Without a doubt, he's going to go, especially if he's had some good food rewards, he's going to go for that high caloric reward and really go for those food items that are bad for him. And this is why bears are often drawn to people. And so hopefully spend a little time talking about bear biology, but you need to understand what is making these bears tick before you could ever understand what they're going to try to say to you if you encounter one. And so what I want to do now is talk a little bit about bear behavior. But before I go on to the behavior part, does anyone have questions about the biology, about what just the basic biological processes or anything regarding black bears? Anyone? If not, I'm going to continue. Okay, this is good. So black bear behavior is pretty predictable. Right off the bat, you see because of their biology, and they're driven to eat. They've got to recoup what they lost during the hibernation. They're getting back into shape, then they got to put on that layer of fat, so they're driven to eat. And so the bad thing is humans, we're often careless with our food. And so the previous slide I showed, when we're careless with our food, we're putting up aromas there that are really attractive to bears. And so the problem with that is when we're careless with our food, it's going to lead to encounters with humans. It's not always food related, but the vast majority of time it is food related. And so this leads to encounters with humans. And the good thing, bears usually, I will never ever say 100% a bear is going to do this or that, but bears usually want nothing to do with humans. And so the good thing with that, bears are extremely intelligent. If you look on the scale of intelligence, they're just below great apes, but they're well above dogs. And so bears, y'all know how smart dogs can be. Bears are much smarter than dogs. And so the cool thing is whenever bears encounter humans, oftentimes they try to talk to us. And so if we know what they're trying to say, it's going to make that encounter so much better. So let's talk first about these encounters. What do I mean by a close encounter with a bear? And I underline that word because I need to describe it better. Now, an encounter is not, you're going for a hike, you're up on Charlie's Bunyan, you're some amazing vista, and you look down in the valley and you see a mother and two cubs walking through the valley down below. That's not a bear encounter. That's you seeing a bear, which is great, take pictures, enjoy the moment, but that's not an encounter. What we're going to refer to as an encounter in this presentation, what many agencies and people refer to, an encounter is when you are so close to that animal that you're going to affect its behavior or it's going to affect your behavior. And so it's that close distance encounter that we're going to be talking about for the next probably 15-20 minutes. So let's start with some close encounters that you have to be really mindful of. First off, there's that surprise encounter where you're too close to the animal. This could happen in the backcountry. You could be walking in a really thick field, a canyon area. You turn the corner and suddenly, bam, there's a bear 10 feet away from you. That's a surprise encounter. You got to be really mindful that bear's going to try to communicate with you. Understand, this is not just backcountry instances. You could live in bear country. Many people on this presentation live in bear country. You walk outside your house, your cabin, you turn the corner to take the garbage out, and bam, there's a bear right by your car. So these Surprise encounters, these close distance encounters, something that you have to be really mindful of. Another encounter you could have is when you encounter a bear either on a kill site or around a food source. Now that's a picture of a bear feeding on a carcass. Yes, that can happen. More likely to happen with a cougar out west with the carcasses, but bears will scavenge carcasses. But when I say around food, you could be in a freshly blooming blackberry field. You could be along a stream where a bear's been flipping rocks and feeding on some grubs. As long as you're around that bear's food source, this may lead to a close encounter with a bear. And once again, this is not just backcountry encounters. You could, again, be walking out of a restaurant and there's a bear in a dumpster. We hate bears that are in dumpsters, but you have to understand it's bound to happen if people leave food around. And so whenever you're in close proximity to that bear's food, it's going to lead to a close encounter with a bear. Another one, and this is probably the most talked about, probably the most hyped instance, is when you encounter a mother with cubs. Female bears are very, very protective of their young. I'm sure everyone here has seen and kind of clenched at that video of the gentleman in Cades Cove approaching the mother with the cubs. Not smart. They're very protective. She is going to try to remove that danger from her cubs. Now, I will tell you, there comes a time when the self-preservation instinct will override the mother instinct, and oftentimes if they're pressed too much, she could abandon her cubs. And again, this is human error that can cause problems for both people and for the bears themselves. So a mother with cubs is a close encounter you got to be really mindful of. Another one is the mating season. I mentioned briefly that in the summertime, males and females get together. The mother is typically with her cubs until the following spring. Early summer, those cubs get kicked out and she mates again, so she's on a 2-year cycle. If you encounter 2 adult bears, say in early summer, say around that June, maybe all the way up into July, there's a really good chance you're around a male and a female adult bear, and that's the mating season. Just understand that oftentimes the one bear or both bears can become protective of their mate, and so that could lead to a close encounter with a bear. And then last but not least, this is probably one of the fastest growing situations that occurs, not just in the backcountry, but in the front country. It's these close encounters with people with their dogs. Now, especially if the dogs are off leash. What it's going to do, it's going to amplify a situation. And if you look at this picture here, that's actually a picture of a Karelian bear dog. These are specially bred dogs that are used to train or haze bears away from campgrounds. And you see this dog chasing the bear away. And they're very, very effective. But what do a lot of people love hiking with, or especially in the front country when they're camping or in their trailer? They're not bringing their Karelian bear dog. They're bringing their little fluffy foo-foo dog that's usually sitting on their lap in front of TV. Now this dog is awesome, very protective, and when a bear wanders into camp and this dog sees it, this dog is going to go after that bear. It's going to protect its owner. And the problem is the bear is going to run because it gets surprised by this little dog. The bear's going to take about 2 or 3 steps, then realize what is actually chasing him, and then he's going to turn around and chase that dog. And where does that dog usually end up running back to? Right back to the owner. And so there's been more and more cases in the paper where people with their dogs, especially if the dogs are off leash, have these really negative bear encounters. So just understand, I'm not saying don't hike with your dog, don't take your dog. I take my dogs all the time. In fact, the dog's sitting behind me. They're wonderful companions and wonderful to have around. Just understand, if you do have a bear encounter with a dog, it can amplify things. And we'll talk about that here in a second. So, everything that I just described there is what we are going to call a defensive encounter with a bear. The bear is going to act defensively, and it makes a whole lot of sense. You surprise a bear at close range, he's going to defend his personal space. If he's on a kill site or a food source, he's defending his food. Mother with cubs, she's defending her offspring. Mating season, they're defending their mate. And again, dogs, They're in that bear's personal space, so that bear is going to be defending its personal space. Every situation you see here, which is the vast, vast majority of bear encounters, the bear is going to be acting in a defensive manner. Now, that begs the question, do bears ever act offensively? And that's a huge question, because we have to know that, because this is what you have to be extremely mindful of. Yes, bears can act offensively too. Literally, when a bear is seeking a food reward, when that bear smells that food on you, whether or not you cook hamburgers or hot dogs, or you have something in your pack or something in your car, the bear is going to be seeking a food reward. And that is what we call offensive behavior. The scariest behavior of all, fortunately it rarely ever happens, is what we call when the bear seeks you. That's predatory behavior. He no longer is seeking the food that you carry, he's seeking you as the food source. Fortunately, this rarely happens. However, if you study enough or read enough, these fatal bear encounters that occur, unfortunately, a few times every year or every other year, it's generally a bear acting in a predatory fashion. It was seeking the human as a food source. Again, it's extremely, extremely rare. You'll probably never ever see that. But if you can recognize that right out of the gates, it's going to increase your chances a whole lot more than not knowing what's going on. So let's start with literally the guts of this presentation, and what do you do with all this information? So hopefully you learned a little bit about the bear biology. What makes a bear tick? What makes the bear do what he does? And because of his biology, and he's programmed to eat all the time, they're looking for food. And because we often carry food or leave food out accidentally or intentionally, it's going to lead to encounters with bears. The good thing is they're going to try to vocalize. They're going to try to do some body posturing, and you should be able to read their vocalizations and body posturing. And so what this all boils down to is this thing called situational communication. You got to understand right off the bat what situation you're in. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, man, this is a lot of information. I'm never going to understand this. It's really, really simple. Hopefully the light bulb will go off and it'll click really, really quickly for you. So first thing, if you're out there, whether or not you're backcountry, front country, on a hike in your backyard, and you encounter a bear, surprised by the close encounter of the bear, right away you have to figure out what kind of situation you're in. And it's really, really simple. There's two main kinds of situations. There's this defensive situation that the bear is going to be in, or this offensive situation. And right off, it should take a split second for you to determine what you're in, because here's what's going on. In a defensive situation, all the bear wants to do is increase the distance between you and him. You're making him or her uncomfortable. So he or she wants to increase that distance. And so it's pretty simple. The bear's trying to get you to back up. He's going to vocalize, or she's going to vocalize. She's going to do some body posturing. She wants you to back up. You can tell within a split second what kind of situation. Fortunately, this is almost every bear situation you encounter. Now, every once in a while, every once in a blue moon, you do encounter, I don't want to say a bad bear, but a curious bear. And so in an offensive situation, the bear's intention is to decrease the distance between you and him or her. And so instead of blustering and blowing, trying to get you to move away, that bear is going to be trying to get closer to you. So you're out in the field, you turn the corner, and there's a bear, you have a stare down for a second or two, all of a sudden the bear starts approaching you, right away, offensive situation. For the most part, when you encounter that bear's not going to want to be there. He may stand his ground. He wants you to back up. Oftentimes they'll run, but it's real easy to see if that bear is trying to get away from you or he's trying to get closer to you. Right then and there, that tells you defensive or offensive. And so it's really easy to pick up. So what's the bear going to do in these different situations? Now remember, the vast majority of these encounters are going to be defensive in nature for that bear. And he's going to speak to you. And this is where you can take notes, guys. And so the first thing a bear is going to try to do is he's going to try to tell you that he's upset or he's nervous. Oh, remember, this is he or she all the time. And so the bear encounters you at a close distance. It doesn't want you there. The bear's getting upset. And so he's going to do some different vocalizations. The first thing he might do is pop his jaws, or it's what's called jaw popping. And I do have a class coming up 2 weeks from tonight. We're going to go through all these videos and everything. So if you like this class, by all means, join that class. But what this jaw popping is he takes his lips and he smacks them back and forth really fast, really loud. You can literally hear his lips popping back and forth. That's jaw popping. It looks kind of aggressive because he's doing all this crazy stuff with his mouth. He's just trying to tell you that he's nervous. You're too close to him. Please back up. You're in my space. So the next thing that he'll do, if you don't do anything, and oftentimes this is accompanied with jaw popping, is the bear will do what we call huffing. He'll exhale really loudly, really quickly, and you can hear it. He'll be going, so he'll be blowing the air out of his lungs, and that's his way of telling you, get out of my space. You're making me nervous. I don't like you so close to me. So this jaw popping and these huffing, oftentimes you hear this stuff simultaneously. And that's just a way of that bear trying to tell you that he's really, really nervous with you being so close to him or his food or whatever other thing that he's trying to defend. Another thing, and I'm not going to demonstrate this, just so you know, is what we call moaning. And it's really easy to describe. I imagine almost everybody sitting here in tonight's presentation has seen the movie Star Wars. And you know that Chewbacca. And Chewbacca, when he would do that groaning, a bear will do that, not as long and as extended as Chewbacca, but he'll moan a little bit if he's getting nervous. So if you hear a vocalization of him moaning, just his way of saying, hey, you're too close to me, or you're too close to my food source, you're making me nervous. But this is my favorite gestures of all. Yawning and salivating. And I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people being too close to bear. You have to understand, I lived near Great Smoky Mountain National Park for a long time. And so I've seen way too many people approach way too many bears. And there'll be people there, and all of a sudden the bear will yawn. And what is the immediate reaction from the public? Oh, the bear's tired. Bear's not tired. The bear is stressed. The bear is trying to communicate, but it doesn't know how to. And when they get nervous, they lose control of their face. And so sometimes they'll yawn. Again, that is not a sign that the bear is comfortable with you around. That's the opposite. And so people are completely misreading these signs, these visual cues from the bears. But the one I love most is the salivating. So you're close to a bear's up in the tree, and he's looking down at you, and all of a sudden he starts drooling. I can't tell you how many people automatically go to, oh my God, the bear's hungry, it wants to eat me. That is not what the bear's saying. The bear, once again, is really nervous. It's losing facial control, and sometimes they end up drooling or salivating. Again, I've got videos that we could watch in another class, but it's wonderful to see this, because as soon as you understand, as soon as you recognize this, you can see these cues happening on the bears, and you know exactly what's going on in that bear's mind, almost exactly. You'll never be 100%, but you have a good idea what's going on, and you can see that bear getting more and more nervous. Those are your cues, just so you know. You see the jaw popping, you see the huffing, the moaning, the salivating. That bear is telling you, he's begging you, please back up, you're making me nervous. You back up, he or she's going to let you back up, everything's fine, you go about your business. A lot of people don't back up though. And so at that point, the bear flips a switch. He's now not upset or nervous, now he's getting mad because you're not leaving him alone. You're hanging too close to his food source. You're too close to its offspring. Something's going on, and now the bear's getting a little PO'd because you're not listening to his cues. And so what he's going to do is, you'll see this a lot, it's called a bluff charge. And this is when he finally flicks that switch, and instead of asking you to leave, he tells you to leave. And so what a bluff charge is not where a bear runs at you for 50 yards and just stops. A bluff charge is where he turns, takes 1 or 2 steps at you really quickly, and I promise you, you will back up. I've seen it dozens and dozens of times. Very effective. It will get your heart racing. He's literally forcing your hand. He's saying, you back up because you're not listening to me. If you don't do that, most people do, but if you don't do that and you're still hanging around, one of the things that they may do is what we call ground swatting. And so what you'll see a bear just kind of hanging out. You can tell he's getting nervous. And all of a sudden he'll look around, he'll find a bush or a log or even just the ground. And all of a sudden he'll beat it up. It'll only last a couple of seconds, but he'll swat it, he'll tear it up. You'll see ground flying, you'll see logs flying. And he's literally sending you a message that if you don't back up now, this is what I'm going to do to you. And so once again, he's in this defensive mode. You're too close to him. He does not want you around. He tried telling you that he was unhappy with you. You didn't listen. Now he's making you back up. All of those cues, you could literally go to Cades Cove and watch people surround bears, and you'll be able to see almost each and every one of these before too long. These behaviors are something that they do very, very routinely. And so that's the pleasure that I've had working with these bears. I will never, ever say a bear is 100% predictable, but gosh darn it, they give you every warning in the book that you ought to know better whenever you're getting too close to a bear. So everything I showed you there is defensive vocalization, defensive posturing. He's just trying to tell you you're too close to him. He just wants you out of his space. So what do you do, or what will you see if you see a bear acting in an offensive manner? Well, the first thing you have to know is the thing he's trying to tell you is he's hungry. He or she is hungry. They're looking for food. They're getting close. Instead of trying to get you to back up, they're trying to close the distance. They're trying to get closer to you. And so the message that they're sending right away is they're hungry. They're looking for food. And so the thing you have to recognize as quickly as you possibly can is what we call the stalking behavior. And so this is the stalking behavior. Just imagine that animal just trying to get closer, trying to close that distance between you and him. And so I always tell people that you may be hiking down a trail and you look over your shoulder and you see a bear walking the same way you are. Don't panic yet, because that bear might be going to the same place you're going. Where you have to be really, really mindful of is if you come to a turn in the trail and you go in one direction and that bear also turns his direction and continues to follow you, that constant pursuit is what has to set off your spidey senses. You have to know that that bear is no longer interested in going from point A to point B. That bear is interested in you for some reason or another, whether or not it's the food in your pack or something else. Another thing you'll see is they're very predator-like. And so if you picture cats, you've all watched Discovery Channel where the cats are crouched down. Their head will stay low or swaying back and forth as they walk. They're in that kind of predator mode. But most of all, their eyes remain locked on you. They don't want to lose sight of you. They want to make sure that whatever they're smelling, whatever they're thinking, they're trying to figure out if there's potential food that they can get out of you. And so it's this stalking, this constant pursuit, this eyes locked. As soon as you see that, right away you know it's an offensive positioning by the bear. Another thing to understand, they're going to be quiet. They are not going to be blowing. They're not going to be huffing. They're not going to be making noise. They're not going to be swatting. They're going to be kind of in that stalk mode. And so very simple giveaways between defensive and offensive. Now I will tell you, again, I'll mention it here in a second, I do have another class 2 weeks from now that we're going to go through all these different scenarios. You'll see some of these bear behaviors in videos, and we'll talk about all that. So please join us in the class 2 weeks from today, if you're interested. But here's the, I gave you the bones, here's the meat to what you have to do as far as having a bear encounter. How do you react? This is your chance to communicate. You stumbled across a bear, and they did some type of vocalization, they did some type of posturing, and now it's your turn to communicate back with them. So let's start with this defensive mode. You have a mother with a cub, You're walking through a field, didn't know she was laying down. She stands up, fairly close range, and she's got one of her cubs or multiple cubs with her. She's in a defensive mode. So what do? You don't pose as a threat. She's nervous as it is. So she does not want you around there. You kind of caught her off guard. You don't want to be threatening. You want to let that bear know, whoa, this was a mistake. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be here. My bad. I will get out of here. And so you slowly back away. You never turn and run. You slowly back away. You face the bear, talk quietly to it. Just let the bear know you're leaving the area and that all's good, but you're getting out of her space. Now, sometimes the bear will come at you. You've made her so nervous that the bear's going to come at you. This is where you got to get her to stop, he or she to stop. Say, whoa, 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 bear, sorry, didn't mean to step in your space. And that will pretty much stop them almost every time because they don't want a confrontation. They just want you out of that area. And so you yell at it, but you don't act overly aggressive. Now, here is where you have the benefit of sitting through this class to understand what's going on, because sometimes you'll get differing opinions here. If contact occurs, if you're in this defensive situation, say you encounter a mother with cubs, and before you know it, that bear comes at you, what we suggest here at Wildlife for You, just drop down, let her know, him or her know, that you are not a threat. You might get a bite, you might get a scratch. The bear just wants to eliminate the threat and get out of there. They have no interest in having this confrontation. They want to escape peacefully. And I will tell you, if you read some literature, I know some game agencies say no matter what with a black bear, you always fight back. I don't ascribe to that. I will tell you without a doubt, I don't ascribe to that. Here's one of the main reasons. One of my good friends, Karen Williams, she lives in Los Alamos, not far from me. She was running a half marathon in this mountain range, the Jemez Mountains, and she came up over the hill, surprised a mother with cubs. Before she knew it, she didn't even have time to get scared. The bear was on top of her. And she was screaming and kicking and fighting, and that mama bear was fighting her with all she had. And Karen was losing that battle. And it wasn't until she rolled over and just shut up and stayed quiet, because the whole time that mother bear thought that there was a threat to her cubs, and as long as Karen was kicking and screaming, that threat remained. So as soon as she stopped screaming, stopped putting up a fight, the mother bear got off of her, grabbed her cubs, and left the area. Now, a lot of times, rarely will you ever have an instance where it's so fast it's on top of you like that. If it does, that's what you should do. Oftentimes, if a mother's coming at you and you yell at it, that's enough to scare her away. But you just have to make that judgment call. Why is this bear so agitated with me? And if there's, like I said, if there's cubs around, there's a really good chance she's just trying to eliminate that threat. So make sure you're not posing as a threat, and she's going to move off. So defensive encounters with bears are pretty simple. That bear wants you to leave. The bear is giving you every ample opportunity to leave. You just make sure you do it. If they come at you, you just yell, say, whoa, I'm getting out of here, and you let them know that you're leaving. So what happens when you have one of those rare offensive encounters? These are the bad ones. These are the ones where that bear is seeking you. That bear is trying to see if you have food on it or if you potentially could be a food source. So what's the first thing you do in an offensive situation? You see this bear coming at you? No, you don't make a will. I don't know how that got in there. The first thing you do is you don't pose as a meal. You don't want to lay down and just offer the bear everything you have. That is the last thing you want to do. And so this is where it's complete opposite. If you recognize right away it's an offensive situation, that bear's being aggressive, this is where you've got to get out of that area, but this is where you become the bigger bear. You become aggressive. You let that bear know that you are the person in charge. You're the animal, the top dog in this fight. And so this is where you shout like you mean it. You pick up sticks, you pick up rocks, you climb up on a rock, you climb up, make yourself big. You scare that bear away. You tell him that if he tries to eat you, you're going to eat him instead. And so it's a completely different reaction. With a defensive situation, you're trying to be meek and get out of there. Offensive situation, you're trying to get that bear out of your area. And so this is the one that's really, really important. There's no mistake in this. If a bear is acting offensively and comes at you, there is no curling up. There's no anything. You are fighting with all your might, because you got to show that bear that you're the one in charge here. And so that's what you do in the offensive situation. Let me look at my time here. I'm doing pretty good. So with that, I'm going to summarize pretty much everything I talked about for the last almost hour. Say something really simple. Bears are wonderful. Bears are intelligent. They're fantastic animals. Extremely smart. You can learn a lot from them. If they talk to you, if you have an encounter and that bear is going to be chomping his jaws or swatting the ground or doing whatever, all you have to do is listen to him. You'll know exactly what he's saying. Now that you've seen this and understand, hopefully it clicks and you'll know what to do in case you have a chance encounter. Now I'm going to sit here. I'm going to answer questions as long as you want. But before I do that, I've got to do a couple of things here first. First and foremost, I got to give photo credits. Bob Howdeshell, a number of folks in the Smokies send me some amazing pictures. Can't thank them enough for all that they send me. But here's what I wanted to tell you. If you like this class, this class was a 2-year anniversary, so we did a freebie class. We give these classes all the time, usually every 2 weeks, sometimes even more than that. There's other instructors besides myself. You can go to this website, Wildlife for You, to register for classes. To register for the class, you can click on the calendar. Now, just so you know, we have to pay the bills for this, so classes typically are about $15, but these bear classes are $12. If you only want the recording, it's $10. The easiest way to follow us, though, is on Facebook. Just follow Wildlife for You, and we'll be telling you what classes are coming up, how to register for them. We'll provide all the links. But here's what I'm really excited about. Mark your calendars. I mentioned it a couple of times. This has been my favorite, most popular class, this Language of Bears. 2 weeks from today, Sunday the 25th of August, 7 p.m. the exact same time, we're doing a brand new class. It's going to be Bear Encounters. It's Overcoming Your Fears. And so what this class is designed to do, the stuff that I taught you tonight as far as their behavior and what makes them tick, we're going to go through different scenarios where, all right, you come around the corner and all of a sudden there's this situation. What do you do? And we'll hopefully have videos to show you. And I will tell you, without a doubt, I've had numerous students tell me after taking some of these classes, they have so much more enjoyable experience in the woods, because if they encounter a bear, right away, I know what that bear is doing. And so it makes those bear encounters much more enjoyable, less stressful, and it helps you overcome your fears. So that class is 2 weeks from today. Sign up. I've already put it on the website. I think I put it on Facebook today. But that'll be a really, really good class if you enjoyed this one. The one thing I do want to tell you, in fact, let me go back to this. If this is your first time in one of these classes, go to our Facebook page. Leave me a comment. Tell me what was good, what was bad. We're always looking to improve. But put a comment there. Tell us what you think of these wildlife classes and whether or not you got anything out of it. That will help us a ton in improving them. So with that, I think I'm going to go to my last slide, which is a thank you, and just I will be around as long as you want, answering whatever questions you have. So give me a second to get caught up here. I'm going to look at some of these questions, and Trish, if you want to get on there, if you know of questions that have been asked, I haven't been looking at the chat, so if you want to cue me up on some, you're welcome to do that as well.
Okay.
I do see that. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you scroll up, Beth has a question about bells, hiking, and using the bear bells.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic question, Beth. In fact, I teach that in another class. We have lions and hikers and bears. Oh my! It's about bear hiking safety tips. And the one thing you always hear people talking about bells or talking about bear spray, and those things are great. I talk about those in the class, but the most important tool that you carry with you, and fortunately you carry with you all the time, is your brain. So being able to identify these sticky situations before you get into them, first and foremost tool that you use. When it comes to bells, there is a couple of different opinions on that. Well, I shouldn't say opinions. What we see is bears that live in areas where there's lots of people. Take Great Smoky Mountain National Park. If everyone wore bear bells, the park would be ringing nonstop all the time because there's lots of people there. Where bells seem to be most effective is those faraway backcountry sites, Alaska, Montana, where bears don't encounter people much. The bell is simply meant to give that bear warning, especially if you're hiking alone. You don't want to surprise a bear at close range. So the bell is to give the bear ample warning of your approach. So if it depends on how much human traffic is there, bears become habituated to humans, and if they hear bells ringing, they'll become habituated to bells as well. Brittany, you did ask a question about rewatching. Yes, everyone here that has registered, even if you didn't attend tonight, will get a copy of the recording. And so you should be able to watch it uninterrupted. I know a few people have had some internet connections issues, so...
Okay, Fred is asking about what you should do if you're attacked, if you have an opinion about that.
I see that. If you're attacked, what's the best defense? Gouge eyes or punch its nose? They always recommend... The bad thing is there's not a lot of statistics as far as what works best, what doesn't work best. But obviously you go for the soft spot. You got to go for anything that's going to distract that bear. If you get a finger or a key or anything in its eye, blind that bear. I will tell you the best thing in that situation is not to get attacked in the first place, and so bear spray works wonderful. But if you ever do find yourself in hand-to-hand combat, you fight dirty. Your life depends on it. So you're grabbing anything and poking anything you can, especially in the face area, whether or not it's the nose or the eyes. Remember, that nose is really sensitive. That's why bear spray works really well. But you got to do whatever you can to distract that bear and get him off of you. And just so you know, remember in the very beginning, black bears are not as big as grizzlies. Grizzlies are a whole other story. This is not a grizzly talk. Grizzlies, you don't fight back. That's a losing battle. Black bears, especially if it's a female, you're looking at a bear that's about your size. And so they're going to do damage to you, no doubt. But you can do damage to them too, and if you do enough, you're going to scare that bear away. All right, reading through. Jennifer had a neat comment here about staying at Big Creek last year, had a bear visit the campground 4 out of 7 nights. Yeah, that bear sounds very much like it's food conditioned. It's probably not going in there for you specifically, but the fact that it recognizes other campers, I can almost guarantee that bear has been fed or has received food rewards based on other campers. And so the bear is food conditioned to that campsite. So whenever new people come in there, it's like, oh, here's my chance to get more food. That is offensive behavior. That's where you got to scare that bear out of there. You don't let that bear come in. They're trying to get closer to see if they can get that food reward. The best thing for you and the best thing for that bear is to make that bear unwelcome there. If that campsite now becomes a place where he's gonna get yelled at, scared at, things thrown at him, he's not going to visit much more. And so that's where you can do a huge benefit to the bears. All right, Lisa asked a really good question I've heard a couple of times. Why are black bears so much larger in North Carolina than anywhere else? They are subspecies and much larger than the ones in Cage Cove. I was talking to Kim Delozier about this, as well as a few other folks just recently. Kim Delozier was the head biologist for Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Where Lisa's talking to, primarily coastal North Carolina, is known for having huge black bears. One of the primary reasons for that is there's a couple of refuges there that are planted in amazing food crops. Whether or not it's for waterfowl that are coming in, but the bears have this literally buffet that's laid out for them every day because of the way they're managing those those refuges in coastal North Carolina. And when we're talking big bears, they're talking 5, 6, sometimes 700-pound black bears, which are monstrous. The record, just so you know, usually when you get a bear that size, it's not related to natural foods. It's some type of human-provided food, like those food crops are human-provided foods. Bears eating natural diets of berries and acorns and grasses don't tend to get so large. But when they get into artificial foods like planted crops, the largest bear on record came from North Carolina. I think it is 880 pounds, somewhere around in there. It lived its whole life next to a hog feedlot. And so besides the feed that they were providing, it was also providing dead carcasses all the time. So the bear was just nonstop feeding on unnatural food sources. That's why a lot of them can get really, really big. Jennifer, just so you know, that too aggressive? No, that was too perfect. Keep doing that. If you get a bear coming into your campground, get that bear out of your campground. Yeah, Sharon, it's funny when you talk about bears breaking into cars because there was a problem. Yosemite, 10, 15 years ago, was having a big problem with bears, literally generations of bears teaching their offspring how to break into cars. In fact, they got so good at it that they were able to identify certain makes of cars which were easier to break into. Some of these smaller, more foreign cars, the adults would climb up, literally jump on the roof of the car and blow the doors out. And so they're extremely adaptable, and as soon as they find out that there's food to be found in cars in that area are, you better not have food in them. John asked a question about a loud whistle. Again, everything will work. The first time something is used on a bear, it's almost, I shouldn't say it's guaranteed to work, but it's likely to work. You spray something, water, you do a whistle, you do an air horn. First time a bear encounters that, it's going to get scared. The problem with whistles and air horns is there's no negative stimulus other than that initial act. So the bear's not getting hurt. So if there's a food source, and he hears a whistle, he might run the first time around. The second time around, he might hear the whistle, but he might grab a piece of food. As soon as they understand that the whistle's not going to hurt him, and he's still getting that food reward, they're just going to ignore that whistle altogether. All right, Lisa asked, do I recommend carrying bear spray? Absolutely do. In fact, in 2 weeks, if you join us, I'll tell you a situation I had. I laugh all the time seeing a lot of these hiking groups where someone will pose a question about being in bear country, and inevitably people say, oh, I carry my 45. And guns are good, guns can help, but guns can miss. Bear spray is a lot less likely to miss, and it's pretty darn effective. And the reason I can tell you guns can miss is I had a situation with a bear coming at me one time. And so bear spray, by and large, when you're in grizzly country, even when you're in black bear country, if black bears still make you nervous, it's a great last-ditch item. But like I said, and I'll always say it, your brain is going to keep you safer than any bear spray will ever keep you. One last question on biology. Once a mother kicks her yearling out, will she allow it to hang out in her area? Interesting enough, Beth. That's a really good question. Yes and no. It depends on what kind of offspring they are. The male offspring, mother bears kick them far, far away. They don't tolerate them in her area. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing from a mating standpoint. It makes sure there's no inbreeding going on. So the mother bear kicks away the male offspring, won't tolerate them. Female offspring, however, are more tolerable. Now, understand that a lot of it's going to be based on the food resources. If there's a lot of food resources around there, the mother bear won't mind her female offspring hanging out if there's plenty of food. If there's not, she's going to say, hey, I raised you, you find your own, and kick them further out. So she's much more tolerable of the female offspring than of the male offspring. But even then, a lot of that's based on food resources. If there's enough to go around, she won't mind. But if things are limited, she taught those young bears how to be bears. It's time they make it on their own. Lorna asked a question. She just watched a rescue in Canada recommended keeping a trash bag in your pocket and pulling it out and waving it. I don't think much of that. I have nothing to base this on. This is just based on my experiences, which I've had quite a few. Like I said, same thing with the whistle. It might distract a bear in the beginning. It's not going to be anything that's going to scare away a bear. Understand that when predators are seeking food and they see something that looks in distress, it amps them up. And so waving a bag might actually attract a bear, because just trying to figure out what exactly is this animal dying, what's going on with this animal. And I'll give you another thing that just came to mind. About a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, there was a video clip of a woman who was hiking in the Pacific Northwest, and she spotted a bear on the trail. She got really nervous. I felt so bad for her. I'm getting chills. I felt so bad for her because she was really nervous, and she was screaming at the bear to go away. And she was screaming in such a high-pitched, nervous voice. I shouldn't laugh. But she was so nervous, her voice was so high that it was drawing the bear to her. Because if you know anything about an animal, when an animal's in distress, like a rabbit or anything like that, it's going to let out a high-pitched squeal. And so her screaming, trying to yell at the bear, was actually causing the bear to cock its head, and you could recognize what's going on. The bear is just trying to figure out what's making this noise. Is this a hurt animal? And so I just really don't think highly of the waving the trash bag type of thing, because who knows what it will do. There's just not enough data to say, yes, it'll do this, or no, it won't do that. Okay, Jennifer asked a great question. What causes black bears to be different colors? Genetics, season? A lot of it is environmental factors. Black bears, again, on the East Coast, heavily wooded area. They're in dark timber all the time. They can have a black coat. You go out west, especially the Southwest, where you have a lot less vegetation. You have pine forests that are pretty sparse. A lot more sunlight, a lot more sun, particularly in the Southwest. So those bears, black fur or black clothes will capture the heat. You don't want to capture heat if it's going to be 90 degrees and sunny all day. And so that's why they develop these lighter coats, these blonde, these browns, even the cinnamon color. Helps deflect some of the sun's rays. So a lot of that is environmental. The Kermode bears, the white ones, that had to be a genetic anomaly that just kind of got lucky and hung on, which is really cool. I think we're all lucky and hung on, because I think those spirit bears are really cool animals. And so it's a mixture of genetics, but a lot of it is environmental. They do better when they have lighter coats in more arid, sunny regions, whereas they're in the deep forest. The black coats can help them blend in, and they do just fine with the black coats there. All right, John said he was on a trail the other day and ran upon a bear, and it started huffing, so we backed off. That's exactly it. That huffing was, hey, we're on the same trail. I don't want you around me. And so that huffing is just, you're too close. And so, John, you did everything perfect. I was, just so you know, I was hearing that little staticky stuff too. I don't think it was on my end. My microphone has been sitting still right next to me. All right. Lisa asked, did you see the cougar that got scared away by the hiker playing Metallica? Someone commented on my Facebook page, and I said I would have did the same thing. I probably would have used Meatloaf, though. The band Meatloaf, not real Meatloaf. Exactly what I was telling everyone before. That is probably just the fact that it's new to the animal. Whistles, bells, sirens, Metallica, anything that is brand new is going to freak an animal out. But unless there's it, Unless there's a negative stimulus, or if that's overcome by a food reward, that's going to wear away really quickly. Okay, Kathy Andrew asked an awesome question. Said there's a bumper crop of apricots here in Los Alamos, which is in New Mexico, impossible to keep up with. The food source is everywhere. What are the long-term ramifications of this huge crop? This is actually really interesting. I think you'll understand this, and it's one of those light bulb moments. Most animal populations, bears in particular, are very reactive to food resources. And so when you have a really, really good year, say you've got lots of rain, lots of good berry crop or apricot crop, lots of food available. One of the key food crops you have to understand is in the fall, whether or not it's acorns in the east or pinon in the west, the nut crop is tremendously important. When you have a very, very rich and ample food crop, the bears are gonna, all wildlife's gonna benefit. And so those female bears are gonna be able to really bulk up. I teach a class, it's gonna be coming up called Super Sleepers. It's all about black bear hibernation. But what happens is the female gets bred, she mates in the summertime. Her eggs, she has multiple eggs inside her, they all get fertilized, but they don't implant, they don't start growing until late fall, because what her body's waiting to do, it's a process called delayed implantation. What her body's waiting to do is see if she gains enough weight in the fall so she can survive the hibernation. And so it's waiting to see if she gains those necessary layers of fat. So when there's ample food crop and she eats tons of acorns and really bulks up, all those eggs that were fertilized, they all implant. And so she's going to give birth to 2, 3, sometimes even 4 cubs. She's going to be really healthy. She's going to maintain all those cubs. If there's not enough food, if there is an acorn failure or a mast failure, that's another term for acorns or nut crop, and she's underweight, she's going to abort all those eggs. She might carry one of them, possibly 2, but for the most part, her body dictates how many cubs she has. So when she's really healthy because there's lots of food, come that following spring, we're going to have cubs coming out of our ears because all the females are going to be healthy. They're all giving birth. They're all giving birth to lots and lots of cubs. On the flip side, when you have that food crop failure and all the females are underweight, come that following spring, there's not a lot of new cubs out there. And so their populations really follow the food source. So when you have multiple years in a row of really good, rich, ample food sources, bear populations could explode. Here in the Southwest, we've been dealing with a drought for the last 15 years. Bear populations have just been fluttering around. Hopefully we're coming out of that drought, so we're going to see lots and lots of newborn cubs. So they're very reactive to the food sources out there. Okay, Linda asked a question. Are yearlings more dangerous than a mature bear? It depends. Yearlings are oftentimes more aggressive. It's life for a yearling is really difficult. They're trying to find their own territory, not having much success finding food. Sometimes they're underweight. That really stresses them out, and so they can be more aggressive. Having said that, yearlings are generally much smaller. You're looking at a yearling that might be anywhere from 50 pounds to 120 pounds. So they're usually much smaller than adult bear. Adult bear gets really stressed, and it's a large adult bear. Yeah, you're looking at a bad thing there. And so it all depends on the situation. Yearling adult could have no problems with it, could have lots of problems with it. So there's no way you could say this group of animals is more dangerous or more worrisome than that group of animals. Charles Herring asked a question about bear spray. Does it work for cougars also? It's funny because if you would have asked me that 2 weeks ago, everything I heard up until then said it works just as well on cougars. However, 2 weeks ago I was leading a class of students up on the Santa Fe National Forest, And the gentleman I was working with is a cougar biologist who's been in on dozens and dozens of cougar kill sites. And he relayed a story of a big adult tom that approached him, and he used bear spray on it, and it seemed to have no effect. The cougar kind of just shook it off. Didn't go any further. The cat kind of turned around, but it definitely wasn't the spazzed out negative reaction that most bears display. But by all means, I would use it in a heartbeat all the time. Okay, Brittany, I am so glad you asked this question. Brittany asked the question, do bears like the spicy taste of bear spray? I was told if you ever spray, you better leave, as they will come back for another taste after it clears out of their eyes and nose. That is a huge issue that many times the public uses bear spray inappropriately. Bear spray is meant and it's designed to stop a charging bear. It will stop a charging grizzly. Remember, their nose are powerful, powerful organs. And when you spray that bear spray, which contains this ingredient called capsicum, it's an irritant. You know what pepper spray is? It shocks their system. You get it in their